to discuss a film here.
Yes, and that film is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. This is based off an underground comic series that was actually noted for being one of the underground comics to actually make money. Anyway, someone decided to purchase the film rights for it, and it went through development hell for several years, and then Edgar Wright, that's the guy who directed it, right?
Awesome director. Made
Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz.
Yes.
Both excellent film.
He made the movie. I have read the comics. I like the comics. I saw the previews, and geez, it looked horribly off. I mean, having it look exactly like the comics didn't necessarily make it feel like the comics in the previews. So I watched the movie, and I'm watching the whole thing, and then it ends, and I kind of walked out in the theater in a daze, kind of trying to figure out what it was I had just watched. It really was unlike anything I had ever seen. And so I sat on my car, just kind of thinking about Scott Pilgrim fighting the 7Xs, being thrown across the air, the Seinfeld stuff, the P-bar, and something about it made me snap, and I stood up and I shouted, against all odds, it was one of the best films of the year. So I loved this movie, and I can't even explain why, but Edgar Rice, I knew he could handle actors, I knew he could handle dialogue, I didn't know he could handle special effects, but apparently he can, and this is one of the few special effects-driven comedy movies that just absolutely work. I think it's kind of right up there with Ghostbusters, where the special effects actually add to the film, and add to a lot of its charm rather than take away from it. And
I think
it's just
that,
a unique experience.
I think that Edgar Wright created something very different with this film. I think he did great with the visual effects, and he did so well with the visual aspect of this film that it made it something wholly unique in its own. And it was an exceptionally funny film. I really enjoyed that about it.
Oh, it was exceptionally funny, and what I like is that the characters were all quirky stereotypes, but he knew how to handle a large cast of characters when some directors have 4 characters, and they can't seem to even get those characters developed properly.
Edgar Wright, with Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, he was so brilliant with those 2 films because they were so well-rounded, and nothing was extra in them. Everything that somebody said was tied into the movie later. It was brilliant. And Scott Pilgrim versus the World was a messier film, and he did great with so many of the aspects of it. It was really, I guess the setup of the story was the only thing that was kind of annoying to me, because it could not have a rise and a fall. It could not have an arc to it, because it was set up beforehand of, well, there's going to be 7 of them, so you're going to have to battle all of them. And it was so furious after the first 2 that by number 3 and 4, it was like, okay, this is routine.
I've always had this quirk with other movies where one thing I can't stand chapters in movies, because when you have a chapter 1, as you're watching the movie, you just keep getting more chapters, and I think it makes the movie feel longer than it is because they're doing that.
Right.
And I feel kind of the same way with this one. It's kind of like a waiting game, and at one point after he defeats the 3rd one, you realize there's 4 more to go, and how much longer are you going to be here?
Yeah, that was the thing that kind of bugged me about the movie. That was really what made it a lesser experience compared to Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz for me. Was that the setup of the 7 of them, the first 3 or 4 were so great that once it got to 5, it was like, how are you going to do this? And he couldn't quite keep the momentum going. And with that sort of a setup, it makes the film's structure kind of lag. And so the film felt really long when it's only, 80, 90 minutes long. And that was a little hard to to fit in there. I mean, the humor was great. The visuals were really good for the first couple of them, and then once it got to the twins that he fought, that was where it was like, okay, this is okay, but it's not as good as what you've previously shown. And in order to make this sort of setup really work, you have to amp it up for the entire fight, or like the entire film. and he didn't quite pull that off, even though the visuals were excellent throughout the whole thing. So that was the only thing that kind of bugged me about it. I really liked it, and I really liked almost every aspect of it. I really thought it was worth calling out that Kieran Culkin, I think that's the Culkin that was in it, he was awesome.
Yeah, that's
as
good.
the gay roommate. He was brilliant. I loved him in that movie.
Oh,
And,
I loved him too. He was really, really funny.
Yeah, and Michael Cera actually played just a little bit against type, because usually he's the kind of awkward Bob Newhart sort of stuttery guy, and he was just a little bit of a dim bulb dork in this movie that really worked. Like, he was
Michael
just a little
Cera
bit insecure about everything.
Serious.
What was that?
Michael Cera is Michael Serious. That's what I said after I saw this movie.
Yeah, no, there's a little bit of, he's kind of not real smart in this movie, and that really made it better. This sort of, like after he defeats the first one of the exes, he like, blows them apart, and then he's like, hey, look, coins! And he's just a dork about it. And that was great,
right.
and it was just a little stupid.
Right, it's like, $250, that won't get me the bus ride home.
Yeah. I have to mention, let's go spoiler alert here, just to say it.
Spoiler alert, folks, just to be safe.
Once it gets to the end of the movie, I had to admit that I did not want him to end up with Ramona Flowers. That actually pissed me off. And that's where the movie lost points for me. She was never cool enough for the film. They point out that she's amazing and she changes the color of her hair and she's the coolest person ever, but she never is in the film. And that bothered me because they make it a big point. Oh, she's out of your league. And then you see her and it's like, no, she's just as whiny and annoying as the other character that he's trying to dump. And at the end of the film, they seem to really build toward that the Chinese foreign exchange student, Knives, whatever, she was the one who actually cared for him. And then at the end they go, no, he's going to still want to go with the other chick. And it was like, why? The other lady, the girl, she's just as immature, but she actually genuinely likes him. And that actually frustrated me.
That's actually interesting that you should make that comment, because here's another spoiler alert, folks. Well, if they probably not listening, if they don't want spoilers anyway. But in the comics, Ramona is really a lot cooler than she is in the movie. But the comics does end with him getting together with Knives.
Really?
So Edgar Rice actually changed that, and it's kind of ironic because in the comics, Knives is like comes off as not quite as cool as Ramona, and you want him to get together with Ramona, but he gets together with Knives. In the movie, you want him to get together with Knives, but he winds up with Ramona.
Yeah, that was annoying to me because other than her hair changing colors, she was never all that interesting as a character. I mean, yeah, she had a bunch of exes, but that was it.
Rude too.
Yeah, I mean, she just seemed kind of bitchy, and she had her own thing going on, and it was never very interesting. Her as a character was not very good in the film.
Right.
It was
so
all
I
Michael
can
Cera's interaction.
Part. It was an interesting change, to say the least, but an interesting complexity. And spoiler alert. But aside from all that, I mean, it really was something else.